few words about colonialism. As you guys know, I'm a bit obsessed with that. And these stupid ways that they have changed iPads and such. Here, let's make it more user-friendly, and this stuff is not user-friendly after a while. Tech guy doesn't even want to touch with any of it. So, but as you know, I'm very obsessed with the topic of Russian colonial behavior in the long-term pattern, because I think it's how it's going to help us shape better policy, so that Ukraine is not a sideline entity that sort of is between the big boats. And there's a lot of evidence in American public record where administrations from Woodrow Wilson, in the current report that I'm still working to finish on Poland, throughout the Cold War, throughout the CIA documents, trying to figure out which nationalists to work with. There are so many condescending biases that lend to an agreement with the one second, do a second browser here so I get your comments also in the there. Where is it? Where is it? There it is. Now I have you on my bigger browser. I can see your comments instead of just on the phone. I do see them on the phone. I prefer seeing it on the phone because then I don't have to do this like line of sight thing. Yeah, the Poland piece. And actually tonight's conversation, although it's partially because I've just been wanting to open this door for a while, Maksym is someone that's been in the orbit, too important in my world of covering news not to have said, man, I've always wanted to talk to this guy. And our mutual friend, Rick the Ukrainian, did an interview with him as part of one of his live streams just the other day. And seeing someone speak makes me even more galvanized to want to reach out and have a conversation about what they know, what they've written. Also, not just about his book, Russian Colonialism 101, but how he sees that in the public space. And I have avoided the toxic platform known as Twitter. I basically clear the notices and go back to what I'm, working on. Today was a little bit of resting, but I'm actually preparing for my my midnight interview tomorrow night, and actually got to see, subject number one's documentary today. A part of it, I had to stop because I had to finish up 2 other articles, but masterful. So about 2 hours of sleep, and voila, here we are. We will have a conversation about what's going on, and then take a break, and hopefully we'll have quiet skies tonight. How are you guys doing on your Tuesday? June 2nd already. Already June 2nd. Let's see here. Today is 1,559 days of full-scale war. 1,513 that I've been living through with Ukrainians. I didn't start really thinking about that number until someone mentioned the amount of time the United States was involved in World War I, 1,365 days. I remember very well what that felt like when I heard that. Vermont, exactly. Our beautiful Kyiv. And I'm gonna not tell you which company, but I might confess while we wait for Maksym. I'll tell you a funny, stupid story. Ready? Are you guys ready? So it's a really stupid story, but had to go to help what we call zbir, collections. Like basically units that are collecting for any number of reasons, tourniquets and drones, etc. And when I went to see Mama, um, I needed to go with just on the other direction. So from where I'm at, an army friend of mine is at this location, shall we say, and halfway in between, Mama's house is right here. So I thought, well, if you're already there, I'll come on by, and I booked a taxi. And to answer the question about Paul and Peace, I'm going to do it after this conversation and a little bit more processing, some additional nuances that to really make it good for the reader. Like, I don't think it's good to just stack a bunch of data. That's the hard part about writing some of these. I come from the book writing world, not from the as much for like web print world. Also radio copy world, which is a whole different world. So, hey, what's up, man?
Hey,
How are you? Long night.
I'm okay. How are you?
Yes, Bob. It's, but I mean, just a little bit, just enough to get the work done. But I was telling this crowd, it's very important to keep the information awareness up. There's a lot of disinformation happening, as you always know, but what is it at the time? How does it keep shaping our policy? And the thing that I definitely wanted to talk with you about is kind of twofold. One, I want more dialogue about Ukrainian everything on this platform. The rivals of the information are definitely on this platform, but some of our allies are. And the more that we bridge the gaps to those worlds, and especially on this particular platform, because when we're done, the video can go to your account, go to my account. We can kind of co-create what should be a good Ukrainian narrative in this space for people that want to help can learn better at. So that's it, a big part of it. And then I know a lot of your news background, in the sense that you are a gold mine of understanding of how it has shaped and evolved in this country. And I appreciate that. So Diakoimo for being here for on behalf of all the people who want to learn. And then the colonialism part is something I've been obsessed with from day one of putting my feet here, because I'm very aware of it in other contexts. I'm Bohemian and Scottish, and I study a lot about American histories of after effects, and especially because I know a lot about American racism and strata of power. It doesn't take much to ladder over. What I had to do was like wipe the slate clean so I don't bring something from the filter of that world here, and that helped a tremendous amount to just learn from scratch. Like, teach me from day one, January 2022, and you guys collectively, I love you all, and so that's what we're here for. And so, welcome to Diamo.
Thank you so much. Once again, I wanted to have an opportunity to try live on Substack, but honestly, there hasn't been no good opportunity or right person to do that until you just slide into my DMs and suggested to do it right away. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
so this is a good opportunity with a
Right,
person
right.
I like. And,
Yeah,
every time,
because I have no bro.
every time you try something new, it's better in a place you would enjoy. And, yeah, and I I also wanted, before to talk about anything, I also wanted to compliment your Vyshyvanka, which is very nice. And I love that color. Where did you get it?
In the first year in a specialized shop, like one of the shops that you have to kind of want to find. Um,
Oh, so
and I
you're a
told
pro.
her this was my first in actually April 2022.
Hmm.
And I kind of went in and I found like what I think of, not when I say the most authentic, you know how the shops can look. It's like, oh, it's really the presentation, like, oh, I'll get that. But there's some that have that other vibe, and it feels more authentic. And I said, show me what I should have. And the lady's like, well, okay, I think this one, and so that was it. And I have about seven of them. The black and red one I got this year because of my attitude problem. So
Hmm.
it was overdue. I was like, I
Yeah,
need that one. Naresti.
that's a very
The
good
ladies they
choice,
kind of
color
laugh with
choice.
me on that. The ladies laugh at that stuff. When the texting comes in and just says, "Teach me what I should know."
Yeah, but I mean,
Oh, and then you have to do what I call the Ivan Franco accents. You got to start getting the additional parts that are what I love even more about Ukrainians. That when I'm around, especially I cycle in the traditional music crowd, and so it's otherworldly. Being from Texas to see like authentic traditional clothing that is not like how in America it'd be washed out as generic Ren fare. You couldn't tell where the hell anything was from. It's sort of old
yeah,
worldish. Here it's not. And when people can start reading the codes, the things that are woven into traditions, it becomes an amazing story that will take me the rest of my life to learn.
yeah. You kind of make me kind of regret I don't wear any of my vyshyvankas because, well, one thing about it, I really love that indeed, if it's a good one, there's always a good story about the pattern or the colors or the way it's done, and people are curious. And why you're telling those stories, you tell something about Ukrainian culture or Ukraine in general.
Yeah,
So it's like such a powerful, good way to socialize and kind of invite people into the culture. And the second part of it, which is I also love, is how inviting in its own, because lots of foreigners over the years would ask me if it's all right, especially Americans, because
hmm
American cultural wars is are very intense, and people are extra conscious about such choices, and they would ask like if it's okay if I wear it if I'm not
like
Ukrainian,
the fear of
like
appropriation. Yeah,
appropriation. Yeah.
right, right.
And I love how, I mean, my personal position that, of course, yes, because that's how you said you, first of all, you can spread the story because whoever in your circles, they will ask you what it is and you can tell, and it's going to be a good
hmm
bridge to build about, something about Ukraine that is about culture, not necessarily just, the war and the
Yeah,
violence and suffering. And the second of all, how inviting lots of Ukrainians are sharing this,
yeah,
and
yeah.
which is a good illustration how also inclusive Ukrainian culture is. I mean, you don't have to be any type of certain like ethnicity or skin color or background,
Amen.
as long as you subscribe to set of values and you love the culture, you love the language, it will embrace you back. And Ukrainians, I mean, I'm sure it's your experience as well. But if you wear a vyshyvanka, people are, really nice about it. If they spot that you're not a Ukrainian but a foreigner, embracing that, that's always such a heartwarming experience.
And I didn't come and go. I only was gone a few weeks in the first year, so I haven't left the country since November 2022. So just 46 days in year one. And it wasn't really my plan. I was working in counterterrorism. I pivoted literally precisely this week, even to just back to my raw news work because that was my strongest suit. The other firm was not going to really be anything anymore. At least definitely not with me. I was tired of America's like oath keepers bullshit, and what am I going to do about ISIS anymore? The world that I understood was here, and I had actually sort of been in the orbit of what was going on here with Inform Napalm and guys as well when I was covering the ISIS disinformation front because it was so overlapping through Syria and other
Yeah, of
bullshit
course.
things that had a certain flavor. And one of the things I've always said when someone said, "Why did you get so into Russian information studies?" I said, "Because there was some particular flavor of their bullshit that was so fucking weird." And they go, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, like, bullshitters from parties battling each other, I sort of understand it. I can ignore it all, but this was a different frequency, always its own, like in Syria, denials about chemical weapons. The rest of the world all agree. Even opponents agreed, except for the one frequency was the Russian frequency. And so I'm 56. I have enough experience in Cold War and propaganda for other reasons. I refused it throughout the early 2010s, like a lot of people
Hmm.
did. Just woke up and had to figure out what the information warfare was looking like. But until I got here, I could not understand the culture until I was standing in front of St. Sophia, or I was in Vinica, or I was in Kamenets-Podilsky, driving through Uman, places before the full scale even, being flown to Avdiivka to stand in front of Sersky, in February 8th, 2022. The Russians are right there. You're like, no, no, literally, they're right there, basically. And I'm like, who's this guy? I actually didn't know who he was, really. I knew him on paper, but I didn't know who he was. And now I've had 4 years of him working with us to protect our lives, like I'm hooked. I love this country. I'm friends with the greats like in the culture world, like Taras Kompanychenko. I got a credit, like a kind compliment with Olana today, who's one of my favorite rapper people, filled with Oleg Skripkin 19 times. I'm transformed, like I'm on board. But bringing
I
guys like Mikhail
if
Melnik and the other soldiers who've done so much. Final phrase is this, and work with the defenders for 3.5 years with the Azov families and the Marine families has just been like, I'm in, I'm hardcore with it. So that's the
No,
message.
that's absolutely true. First of all, I haven't met a single foreigner who hasn't been transformed
Absolutely.
by
They get
visiting.
hooked.
I mean, nowadays more than so, but since 2014, um, we launched one of the earliest programs of bringing foreigners to Eastern Frontline, to
Mhm.
Avdiivka and to Bakhmut and Slavyansk. We started inviting members of the parliament, Europeans, Americans, and we would drive them there and to show the consequences, especially of the first wave of Russian invasion. The devastation that was by at that time we thought that was quite a lot and painful when you saw the remnants of some buildings in Slavyansk or
Oh
Kramatorsk.
yeah.
And then we would, as you said, we would drive them also to Avdiivka and to show what actual frontline in Europe looks like. And I haven't remember a single person who wasn't like
Yeah.
profoundly changed after that trip.
Well,
But it's funny, yeah,
tell this crowd about your town. I'm dying for them to hear the part that I think matters most for our moment.
yeah.
Like I have T-shirts that say Chornobyevka. We know why Chornobyevka has its own legend. Your town, it will go in history books, in my opinion. But would you mind telling our audience where you're from and why your town matters so much, and especially what it looks like?
You mean Zaporizhzhia?
In particular, your town, though. Yes, in Zaporizhzhia. Yes,
So, I mean,
the
I'm
unconquered
actually,
territory.
I'm, yeah, I'm actually from Zaporizhzhia Oblast, which is a region. And I was growing up in Zaporizhzhia, but I was born and raised in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, which is now part is unfortunately temporarily occupied. And but I I feel still like, first of all, I believe that it's only temporary because, the empires would always come and go to these parts, but they would always find the ways to get back to freedom. I mean, these are also the regions where the uh, um, the movements of Ukrainian Cossacks started, and this is the
Right, right,
frontline part where there would be a lot of battles and a lot of contact between various empires, and the Austro-Hungarians and Russians and Turks and everyone for a long
right,
time. But specifically in the last 100 years, that also the southern eastern part was also the most brutally colonized part of Ukraine, where when Russia conquered and colonized the entire this part, what they started doing these massive population movements. They would deport entire cities, entire regions, and then they would bring new people. And then in this way of uprooting, they were ensuring that there is like nothing authentic stays, and people lose
right,
their memories, people lose their roots, literally and figuratively. And of course, it got only worse and worse during the 20th century, where with the Holodomor genocide, which is the largest man-made famine in human history, that was devastating, particularly this part of Ukraine, very, very bad. So
Right.
it still fascinates me that after all of it, when I was growing up, despite that, we can talk about separately, but because despite that, I was already speaking Russian and I was raised speaking Russian, but people around me would speak still Ukrainian. My grandparents would speak Ukrainian. My parents would be mostly speaking Ukrainian, and they would still carry some traditions. Yes, as I understand, those traditions would be really, really badly misshaped and misprogrammed, but still they would crawl and they would hunch on those traditions and still carry on despite
Yeah.
all of this that happened. Despite that, it would be much easier for them to say like, okay, we give up, we're Russian now, we can
Right.
assimilate, we can speak Russian, we can pass, although not everybody in my family could pass for white Russian, but we can figure out something that is less of a path of resistance, but they haven't. So that's why I'm pretty sure that whatever is occupation is there at the moment is also very temporary.
Yeah. My adopted family is from Kherson, with a family split in left bank
Mhm.
and Skadovsk. Um, the whole region, and the more I've learned over 4 years of things that will never be on the internet, never be chattered amongst anyone but family at the dinner table over things and traditions that in America just don't exist. I mean, we have like Thanksgiving. That's it. That's the only time families might come together. Here, like, oh no, tonight we have our whom will be here, and it's you have to be here. It's like 7 o'clock. Like, okay, it's traditions that matter and bring people together for a talk that I would not have known before war. I don't know that context
Mhm.
until I think about it and I hear through books other stories. And I think so. These stories have been going a long time, actually. They're just a different version of the same old damn story. The terrorist nation to the northeast that can't stop being an empire
Mhm.
in some capacity. Um,
I would recommend, maybe you've already read, but also to your audience, the book by Olia Hercules. She's a
mm,
celebrity chef, a British Ukrainian celebrity chef, and she was
yeah.
born and raised in Kherson Oblast,
Oh,
the
okay.
part that
Okay.
is now temporarily, unfortunately, occupied as well.
Turn me
And
on. And we will do it.
yeah, and she published last year. No, it was actually this year. She published her first, because before her all books were cookbooks, which are
Mm-hmm.
absolutely amazing because they're based on Ukrainian recipes,
Mm-hmm.
and she
Mm-hmm.
would constantly flex in Ukrainian culinary traditions even before it was mainstream and cool. And she would do
Right.
these several cookbooks, which are in my house the best cookbooks we own. But this year, she also published her first memoir that's specifically about how she was growing up in Kherson Oblast
Right.
and how it was also super hard for her to connect with her own roots. That despite that, sometimes as you told, that these like lovely dinners that people have, especially if you live in the countryside, there are these summer kitchens. People every evening come together, they cook, their entire family is there, and people, chat and talk until the sun goes down. In my village,
Right.
we would do it during summer and during the warm months all the time. But what was striking during those dinners that you now retrospectively kind of understand, that people oftentimes like talked a lot and there was a lot of connection, but not a lot would be said, especially about the past. Like
Right.
people would always really avoid conversations where you need to go into detail about the past. Like
Mhm.
what happened, how you lived, why there are so many missing family members in your family, which is, kind of
Right.
the story for all Ukrainian families. And all of it was never said and verbalized ever during those conversations. And she wrote this beautiful, powerful, not very thick memoir, how she worked her way in the last 4 years in really reconnecting and unearthing all the facts about her family, On
Right.
top of that, an anxiety that she is still having because her homeland is temporarily lost. So you cannot go back. You cannot ask people. You cannot go into archives. You cannot, our, for example, family albums are all lost. The archives are all gone. So you kind of feel this mission that if you don't do it now with your life, with your family, now, it's going to be forever lost because the next generation might not be already care or have access or even memories about what has happened. So I think in a very practical way, this what colonialism often looks like in
Mhm.
practice when you have these so many robbed pieces of your identity, including memories, including the family stories that are people know but are too afraid to tell because
Mhm.
they can expose themselves, their authentic selves, or they just, forget and lost and there is nothing written down and no memories. By the way, the last thing, which she also mentions, but such a cool thing, also related to Ukrainian cookbooks, for we were just, when she was writing those memoirs, we were chatting very often about kind of the how she would shape the book and how to ensure that we kind of you know have the right vocabulary to talk to the foreigners about you know because you don't want to just like bombard them with colonialism, imperialism, and all these very heavy
Socialized level talk.
academic terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own context and it can sometimes backfire. But how do you
Sure.
practically share through something like that? And we remembered the kind of like it was a aha moment for both her and me that we remembered that in a lot of Ukrainian families, cookbooks will be that last safe refuge for any family related information
Oh.
that
Uh-huh.
um, usually women would put in writing in between the recipes because that would be a safe place where no colonial authorities or imperial authorities would
Right.
search, look.
Or
Um,
might understand what was being said.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's where you would find, for example, some family facts that are not present anywhere else, not in
Right.
archives or anywhere else, or
Right.
some like
Wow.
stories or something like that. And that's why when Russians oftentimes started doing the recent wave of occupation, they would do like destroying even that. So not only destroying family albums when they would raid the home, but also destroy like such trivial things as cookbooks or anything handwritten that it's there because they knew that that's probably where the true knowledge would be, safely safe.
How much did the diaspora help bring that back after a period of time, after 91, for instance?
Um, Yeah, I just also saw some of the live chat comments, which is super cool. And Laura, yeah, says that it's easier to control disconnected people. Of course, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the entire kind of strategy of colonialism in practice. Because I mean, those people who you do not eradicate physically, and those who
Right.
survived, you need to drive down your costs on managing them. And what's the best way to manage them is to rob them of their stories, of their roots, so they don't feel like they're rooted anywhere. They have, nothing authentic happening or going on. And then there's no connection, of course, between people because communities are ruined that way. Yeah, sorry, I had to just
No,
react
no,
because it was
perfect.
such a good comment.
Yeah.
Um, uh, what did you ask once again? I'm so sorry.
Well, yeah, it's okay. One of the things that I actually want to just make sure we deal with for this audience, and I'd like to have like several, like tons of conversations with our audience over segments. So over time, let's think of like takeaways in smaller form, like you mentioned about 30, 40 minute bits where we go, okay, tonight let's try to achieve an understanding about and put a concept in place. And I'm gonna use segments I've written that won't they're not in a say a book right yet, but they will belong in an anecdotal book about Ukrainians. Today, when you were coming on, I was talking about a taxi thing that happened yesterday that will go in my stupid American doesn't know how to buy anything segment.
Mm,
And it's a way that an outsider comes in and goes, how are customs about purchasing things? How are customs about interacting with transactions? Especially like during war, it becomes a very intense conversation. Like, you know, these are vegetables and you only have cash, whatever, she's gonna get upset. She's 70, she's been there all day. These interactions are very different than what I'm used to in America. That's very mechanical. Even though we have farmers markets and things, we have those things, but it's very different here. And with the Lukyanivska attack that happened a few days ago,
mm,
people may say, "Oh, within 4 days." I was like, 4 days? I was out there the next day. The ladies sitting down on their stools with what they have because they have to. And I've developed a street connection across this city and Lviv, and I'm there. That's on that level on purpose. Um, then there's the way you get treated. So I have segments like the Babusi Intelligence Agency, which is hilarious. A bunch of stories that are both drawing from history and literally asking people, tell me, here's my concept about the chapter, that the Babusi are the most incredible people, and here's why, but they know everything. So just don't try to outflank them. You can't. And when I put that on the table, I get very interesting, elicited conversations about, oh, yes, of course, the lady down at the building who's concierge, 75, she knows who comes and goes, every one of us. Um, but there's fun stories and there's heartfelt stories and there's sad stories inside that chapter. So part of the way I intend long term to keep trying to put things together is that the other chapters like the power of Putin Huilo, how a foreigner came in and at checkpoints in that first month of hard scale war coming at Kyiv, um, I throw out Putin Huilo to a border check guard that was giving my Ukrainian best buddy in the world a hard time, and everything just sounded lightened up, and I got a patch. And then I was down in the south, and the same thing happened, and it's like, well, this is something to this. But my point is that there's just these ways, it's these interlocking parts of telling the story about Ukrainians from the outside become interesting to the average audience in like Ohio or something,
mm.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, first of all, I still think that, there is not enough spaces given for Ukrainians to share their stories.
Right.
Um, I mean, maybe a bit more for Ukrainians to be included in the news coverage and have these maybe a bit of kind of updates or maybe some even expertise. I'll be very rarely, there's the
Right.
explosion in Europe, for example, all these resilience and preparedness programs, and not a single one or few of them even reach out for Ukrainians who are arguably the best prepared people in Europe for any
Amen.
expertise or knowledge. But apart from that, I think there's so much still locked in really average human stories that every Ukrainian can share. We just
Right.
had several seasons of this project that we were running, Ukrainian Spaces, which was,
Mhm. I
we
remember.
did, it's an audio show. We did 80 plus episodes, and each one of them was just unfiltered Ukrainian story told by a Ukrainian in whichever way and whichever direction they chose to do.
Wow.
And it was such a rich, even for me, source of knowledge that is not highbrow, not academic, not news, but would help me to understand even myself better, understand Ukrainianness better, understand the history, the modern times of Ukraine through the simple human story.
Right.
And I think this is what is still super missing for me
Mhm.
in foreign coverage as well. There's not enough space for various reasons because how our content creation is, how our news industries are. Um, but I think through them, you can get a much better sense of what is happening today, what has happened before, and what led to it. And um, maybe even for a lot of people, they find inspiration for their own, kind of situation or dealing with anxieties because everybody today has an anxiety about this crazy, mad world that is
Right.
completely off the rails, and you don't know what's going
It's
to
on
happen
fire.
next hour, notwithstanding next day. But um, just a small comment on Lukyanivska. I
Yeah, please.
actually, when I lived in Kyiv for some time, I lived at some point next to Lukyanivsk. I would go to this bazaar all the time, and
Yeah.
I I clearly remember that around the same time I was starting learning about the kind of in general history of bazaars in Ukrainian
Mhm.
culture, especially in the last 100 years of Russian occupation, because during the Soviet time of Russian occupation, the ideology came completely different, and they forbade people from doing at first all this interpersonal trade. So you can have a bazaar. You can go to your community and sell or exchange something freely. They would say,
Right.
no, this is like all forbidden.
Wow.
But they failed with this in Ukraine because people would still find a way, and
Sure.
women would still show up and do that because they've been doing it for centuries before. And it's not only about trade; it's also about community cohesion and connection, because people meet each other, they talk, they gossip, they everything. I mean, this is like the whole gluing point of the community. So you cannot just say no. So they still found a way, and then the occupation authorities had to budge, and kind of it existed in semi-legal form when I was already, was born and then growing up,
Right. Right.
because I was born still during Russian occupation a bit.
Right.
And when times were super tough, and like in 90s,
Mhm.
of course, that was the only way for you to survive, to go and sell something and buy, because the money would make any sense. But still, I remember my mom was working at some point there as well, trying to earn money. And it was also the place where we'd find a lot of like support, because
Mhm.
people would also come together at these dark times. But, they still would find the ways to chat and share the stories. And once again, it was safe space where, I mean, all masks are down. People are there for for sell something or buy something, but at the same time, everybody understands this is how you still see the faces, you hear the stories, average stories, regular stories, and you can find some inspiration or learn something that will help you to survive.
Yeah, I can say that I've learned something that's different than the word stoicism from Ukrainians. It's not, I don't want to put it in stoicism. It's got its own Ukrainian flavor. And in particular, the day that it was announced that Donald Trump was clearly going to be the next president and returning to the White House, I collapsed in front of my Ukrainian mom and felt completely gutted because I knew home would never be the same. Family and occupation was, things would be more difficult, and her ability to return to her home and Kherson city itself, Nemozhna. So I'm gutted, and just an American guilt, even though, and she knew, she actually would raise her voice at me because 2 o'clock in the morning I'd be yelling at Americans on the radio about A, and I would tell her, "Mama, я сказал про допомогу." Well, and she would calm down immediately because she knew why. Um, Зброї, mama. um, but she said, "Все буде добре," very quickly, put her hand on my shoulder, calmly, lovingly, and said, "Все буде добре." And those words from a mom who lived in occupation until November 2022 were divine. They meant something, something that can only be learned in Ukraine in this context. A woman who lived in occupation through Kherson and lost her husband immediately after says, "Se bude dobre," and my best buddy from same situation says, "Se bude dobre." You learn what it means on a deeper level forever. You just gotta ride with the Ukrainians.
Yeah, thank you for
And it's
sharing
not
that.
ancient history. Oh, the Laska. And it's not ancient history. That's the thing. It's not ancient history. We don't have to look in history books for extermination. We could look right now, real time, and that's even more galling.
I uh, I often think of unfortunately, I don't have any grandparents left, and my last grandma passed away last year. And I still oftentimes remember or go back to the stories that they would, whatever little they could
Hmm.
share, and about especially the war and the
Right.
oppression that they went through. And it always, really, always fascinates me to think like when I was growing up, I didn't not really felt that these are really, broken or traumatized people with PTSD, and because of all the hell they went through their lives, and their lives never been easy, war or no war. But
Hmm.
they somehow still created this environment of normalcy. I mean, maybe
Hmm.
it's in my only family, but I know for a fact that it's not only in my family, where would still not feel the burden or not see the burden that they definitely carried through their lives, right? And they
Right.
survived
Right.
through lots of shit. And these days, I oftentimes come back to it and think, like,
Hmm.
how did they do it? Like, we in our generation and people of this, after all this over, will be still able to carry on the same way, that you don't pass on the same kind of burden and the same trauma to, younger people, and you just
Right.
able to move on. And I think when you shared the story, like this is often what I would always remember, that they had this kind of not delusional, but really strong sense that they've seen the worst, and they've been able to rebuild after that over and over again. So whatever you're going through at the moment, probably from their vantage point, does not seem catastrophic, and they know that you're going to be fine, they're going to be fine, because this is what you're wired to do. I mean, especially
Right.
Ukrainians, you're just wired
Right.
to carry on, because the simple act of carry on is already resistance on its own, right? Because this is what
Right.
they want us to stop doing, like stop doing anything and just be broken and, sad and traumatized.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other parts I've seen in my close work with the defender families who were going through unspeakable burden on their lives, and this includes not only ones that know where their defenders are, generally speaking, in captivity itself, but in this era of unknowns. And there are times when their patience with the pain is off the charts. All I can do is witness it. Maybe in time the words will come. I see it, and I'm close to them enough where that's where when I don't feel good, I get up. When I don't feel
Yeah.
good, I still show up. They'll
But can
say in
I,
return,
Chris? Can
yeah, of
I
course,
can I add one thing quickly?
please, of course, of
Because
course.
I'm not an expert on American politics in general. I
Yeah.
never comment and never it's not my place to engage. Um, I just wanted to add that, I mean, that's something you cannot ignore, undeniable, right? The change in American politics, everybody follows it just because of the size of the culture, size of the influence of America on the rest of the
Right.
world. You cannot, I mean, it's stupid to be ignoring or dismissing. But I,
Right.
I I also feel like oftentimes from the Ukrainian perspective, what has happened to America, or any, not just America, but any political polarization is still seen a bit with a distance,
Hmm.
because once the existential test comes, like, and you see it in Ukraine all the time, right? People do
Sure.
can disagree on, and are, Ukrainians are disagreeing on everything. You have two Ukrainians
Yeah.
in a room, you have automatically at least like 5 to 7 political parties emerging, right?
Right. 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 Right.
But once existential test comes, and we are in existential times, Ukraine, Europe, democracy in general, it doesn't really matter that much which kind of political side you are, as long as you agree that, kind of we need to survive through this as a free
Right.
society, right? How we build this free society, how we run it, what kind of ideologies behind it, that's something to debate. But what
Right.
sometimes scares me, and especially in Europe at the moment, when I see that such existential things as, for example, defense
Mm-hmm.
or preparedness policies become hostages to politics,
Mm-hmm.
when it's
Mm-hmm.
something that everybody should agree right away and
Right.
it should be beyond politics. Should we be able to defend ourselves because the tyrannies are conspiring at the moment to end democracy for good? Should we do that? Yes. Should we spend more in defense? Yes. Should we prepare more? Yes. Right, left, center, it doesn't matter. There's supposed to be consensus. And the closer countries, closer to Russia or China, or Iran, those who live next understand the threat intimately, you can see all over that these issues are not political for them. They can,
Right.
fight all they want for literally any other issue, which is fine. But the whole purpose that we need to preserve the space where we at least have an opportunity for a debate. That's supposed to be everyone's top goal, and everybody has a job to do, and everybody can contribute something to it.
Yeah, Samitak. One of the things I would say about it, where it was, especially in our home, is that because of my specific work, um, I, although I do care about the American perspectives on the party politics, not necessarily about the parties, but at least the domestic politics issues that should stay in America. Mine was not that. Mine was that I knew aid would be cut off. I knew that he had been in the interim period of not being in office, had already been working to sabotage without being in office with a specific obsession that is not normal. Something's wrong with that. And so now, when essentially the floodgates were open for damage to Ukraine, that's what gutted me. Um,
Mhm.
Knowing that they were already broadcasting that they were willing to give away territory meant occupation was a condemnation now, not simply a situation to deal with. It's now got unknown quantification worse. Now, I was wrong on one level, but intuitively I wasn't, because I knew where to be. I knew to be with Ukrainians. I knew wherever that goes, that's the people who will know how this goes. And signed on fully. And just, it's almost like the backbone snaps into place and goes, okay, now I know what to do.
I
So
also remember
follow the Ukrainian.
I remember one of my grandmothers would always say, like, everything that happens for a reason, and oftentimes she said everything that happens
Yeah,
for a good reason. But if and that's why I try to. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's delusional. I think it's just helps you to recalibrate your focus all the time and
right.
find something that kind of, okay, going forward makes sense and where that direction is. But when it happens to that change that you describe, I think that 2 years down the road, when we see that America is now seeking Ukrainian help to fight a modern war, uh, you, America is seeking Ukrainian
Who's got the cards, baby?
technology. I think it is unfortunate, and I think lots of people died and were killed that could have been saved, if not
Yeah,
that. So let's not deny or downplay the effect that it had. But Ukrainians still managed to come back stronger and to
right.
show what they're made of. And they show that they're actually the best people to bet in any situation. And I think that those 2 years kind of showed a lot of people what we're dealing with, that we're not dealing with, a country that is begging for help and aid and just needs, someone else's help to survive. they turned around the entire situation, and now they're not only the most experienced army in the
Mhm.
world, in the free world for sure, but also the army that has the most technological advance in, among the free world. Of course, if we count Russia, Russia is the second best army in the world now, unfortunately. But that's a good story to keep in mind. I think perspective to also to keep in mind that we haven't wouldn't arrive at this point if not that unfortunate thing happened.
Yeah, najkrащі люди. It's why it's actually, by the way, why I got on Substack was also my best friend Andrei. I did small videos about blackouts only on Facebook,
Hmm.
locked off only for friends, just so he could see what was happening in the neighborhood because he's displaced. And he's, oh no, I want to share it. I'm like, I want to share it. Like, I don't do selfie films. I film Ukrainians. I don't film me. Um, and then I turned it to where you could do that. And then I was staying in my neighborhood talking about our situation, and neighbors who already saw me anyways would say, "Thank you
Hmm.
for talking about us." It's like, but wait, and I really was turned off to the influencer crowd for the last 4 years. But once I found these people really wanted to pay attention to um, what I was seeing in Ukraine, not just the stories that are hard stories to tell, but kind of randomly flipping into something. Guys, let me tell you about a funny thing that happened today. This is so hilarious. And you like I take the time to kind of be witness to a part of the culture and life here that is whatever in the moment that needs to be shared with these people, and they keep coming back and say, like, literally, we want more. We really want more here. And Twitter became a noise fest, so it's hard to figure out where your
Yeah.
broadcasting is even going. Here it wasn't, and I think that for anyone who isn't a paid subscriber, be a paid subscriber to Maksym and make sure that we're boosting all the posts. Actually, I admitted that I had been reading your post, but I went through today. I was like, dude, you haven't been reboosting them enough, or you. I don't think they wear off. I think they'll show that you reboosted. So guilty as charged as well on this platform. I see you mostly on Twitter, and I'll say a high five that when you followed me back at one point or whatever, I was like, I know that guy. Didn't know you, but your reputation was really, really good. And even here, when I mentioned it last night, 4 people messaged were very happy. I think we have a mission here on this platform, and I'd like to keep expanding. Like Yulia Klishnik was here. She came on. I hope Yulia, you have to come back here with us soon. Life in Ukraine during war segments. She was literally a blackout at her apartment. I was in here in mine. And we're like, so hey, Swindling the Maya's stuck. Just kind of a back and forth. How's it going? And hey, guys, y'all have a question about what we go through in blackout? We just started just answering the questions. Like, oh, wait, how do we do that? Oh, I guess in my building we do this. What do you guys do in your building? That will go down in how the life develops for someone later when this is over. It goes, look what they went through. And we
Yeah.
talked about it.
Um, Absolutely. The only thing that I think worth highlighting, and I'm a bit wary about not to for people not to embrace this the image that the Ukrainians are completely unbreakable, and can survive through absolutely everything, because
Uh-huh.
it's kind of become self-reinforcing narrative, and especially people who are sympathizing with the Ukrainians, but for example, do not feel energized or motivated to help any or empower Ukrainians anymore. I think
Uh-huh.
this is a narrative that can get you a bit of more comfort, saying like, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, they will turn every situation around, and they will, fight back, and they will preserve,
Yeah.
and they will be fine, which is simply not true, because once again, from the vantage point of me studying Russian imperialism and 500 years of Russian imperialism in general, and all the wars that they waged, and all the the invasions that they waged, Russian colonies 101 was what, just about 100 last years, and it's still documented 48 invasions so alone. You still see the pattern that is still massive empire with massive amount of resources, and the that it's compounded with absolutely minuscule capacity of people to uh, fight back within the empire. Especially, Russians as a titular nation within the empire, they almost
Mhm,
have no history of effective uprisings or
mhm,
even coming close at confronting the imperial culture and imperialism in general. So you have those two kind of factors together, and you understand that they can carry on with this war for a long time. And Ukraine is smaller, and Ukraine has less capacity, less resources, less human resources, less talent, just numerically
mhm,
speaking. And that's not a given situation. And now we're talking in the last several weeks about this window opportunity. Everybody talks about, you have friends on the front line, um, fighting on the front line, but also politicians, leading researchers of war. They all talking about Ukrainian managing to deliver a breakthrough that is unlike we've seen since 2023. That gives us this unique window of opportunity of 4 or 5 months when, if pressed further, if empowered with more resources from allies, we have the real chance of ending war and ensure that Russia sits behind the negotiating table and respects the
mhm.
ceasefire, respects the whatever is happening there, not playing this kabuki theater like it has been before. But that window is very short, and
Right.
Ukraine has to mobilize whatever enthusiasm and whatever support that is there to push forward and lock that breakthrough down and ending the war. So if people feel like there's no kind of opportunity for them to energize, or I understand that everybody's tired and everything. It's been a long time. Ukrainians probably, the most tired of them all. But
Yeah.
this is a real opportunity. It is happening now. And I think we shouldn't sleep on it, because if we're already so invested, this is our opportunity to help Ukrainians to finally end this war.
Why don't we leave them with a final thought? Take as much time as you want on this. I know we've both been thinking about this, so I want your thought on this, and then I want you to come back as much as you want. By the way, anytime you
Thank
have
you
an
so much.
impulse
You're
to put a
so
story on
kind.
the table, we'll. What I'd like to have had is like 5 nights a week of like, let's talk about Ukraine, and then on the weekend we'll have like my friend Volodya Voigt playing Bandura in my studio or something. Um, culture nights, as I call them on weekends. So, um, one of the things where we both were exploring was the Western betrayal, and the way I'm on it for my new article about Poland in particular
Mhm.
is that during Woodrow Wilson's, this is in 1919, Woodrow Wilson's administration, there was essentially a blind eye turn to Polish abuses and atrocities, participation in. So the pogrom of 1919 in Lviv is an example. I had been led to believe through too much news, and even from the Ukrainian side, just the way it's presented, about facts of the Lviv pogrom, but not like, wait a minute, what if I just said only the Polish side? Oh, wait, it's still bad. Okay, let's dig into that for several days. And what stunned me for about a half a second, until it didn't, was that the Woodrow Wilson administration said, well, we're not going to say much anything about Poland about that because we want to stave off the Soviet Union progressing further into Europe. So whoever was behind that dismissal, meaning the human beings on the ground whose lives were ended and or destroyed, they didn't count in D.C. Right, a century ago. It was easy, convenient for the big politic again. And that just turned into a rabbit hole as part of the way I work. It's like,
Mm,
I want every possible examination of that behavior from the West, and then I run into your words, the consent. And I went, that's it. That's exactly it. It's the consent of having this be okay. And if it was something we only saw in the current administration, a bit in the last one, a bit in the one before that, all the way back to Chicken Kyiv, that would be one thing. But it's too many of
mm,
them, too long. And I think you make a good point about how it's like colonial power will cover for colonial power. just naturally. So let's that's my premise to put on the table to hear your thoughts for our audience here, and then and it was like, please have Maxim back. How about if it's the other way around? Maybe if I'm blessed, he'll give me his time too, because
Yeah, we absolutely
he's
should.
always welcome.
We should do absolutely the other way around.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
been enjoying it a lot. Thank you so much for kindly inviting me.
always. Yeah. I
That's
invite.
I mean, you answered in many ways yourself. I mean, we know the long history of imperialism in many Western societies, and those who are still decision makers or those who influencing the events. Maybe it's also self-reinforcing mantra that, oh, we're dealing with big powers and big guys somewhere in faraway room will decide everything and will negotiate everything, and we'll just hear their decision and we'll obey to it, which is a very imperial outlook on the world. I don't
Yeah.
share that outlook of the world. I come once
Right,
again
right.
from Ukraine, where this never landed well, and people never accepted that this is how things are, and nobody except you or you on your own can decide your own fate and decisions. It's a freedom, but it's also a responsibility that you take seriously. So I still believe that we're in a very different um, times now. Despite what you mentioned in 1919, how the Paris Peace Convention after the World War One just decided not to recognize dozens of already declared of Russian former Russian colonies that declared independence, dozens,
Right.
including Ukraine. And they decided, no, this is not worth of our time. We're not recognizing their independence. We're not supporting their sovereignty. We don't want to mess with Russia. We don't want to
Yeah.
poke the bear, whatever the. So that parallel is strikingly similar, right? But
Hmm.
we're living in completely different times because back then, for example, if America did not support Ukrainian or Georgian or Estonian or Bashkir independence, there would be not that much consequences, honestly speaking, for America. There weren't.
Right.
America
Right.
continued to carry on, the Western Europe continued to carry on with our lives, and it was fine. What is happening now that Ukraine is not fighting a local war with Russia. Ukraine is fighting the war when democracies are faced with tyrannies. And all
Right.
the tyrannies, China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, everybody, they're coordinating, they're working together, they're brainstorming together, they're innovating together with the one single goal of ending democracies, period. So Ukraine in that sense, it still has been for all these even 4 years, but 12 years of the war, a source of so much practical knowledge that is still underappreciated that will help all of us to understand how to defend our democracies better. You mentioned, like how to survive without electricity and what Ukrainians do and how to not to freak out and how to not, you know,
Hmm. Hmm.
completely fall apart in chaos. This is very practical for every family, every household that everybody can learn
The
because
low level
preparedness.
of chaos, the low level of chaos over 4 years speaks for itself compared to what's actually come in
Absolutely.
to hit Ukrainians. That people still conducted, like, there's a little bit of elbow pushing in the metro that kind of is irritating, but that's it. You know,
Yeah,
all these other
absolutely.
things do not happen. At curfew, there might be occasionally an argument at 2 o'clock in the morning between two drunk guys that finally goes away, and it doesn't happen for weeks. But when Usyk wins victory during a fucking missile attack, you're going to hear cheers. That's the nation that I love.
Absolutely. But that Chris is not a culture. That
Yeah,
is just years and generations of really hard work on preparedness and creating
yeah,
this culture of preparedness. It's not
yeah,
rocket science. It's not magic trick. Everybody can actually access this knowledge, and there is a possibility to transfer it and adopt it.
yeah,
This is
exactly.
one thing. Um,
Yeah,
and the second one is modern war. Once again, I feel like it's not understood well enough. It's not mainstream enough. The way the war has changed in the last 4 years is mind blowing.
True.
We haven't seen anything like that since World War II, or in some respects, World War One.
Right.
And the bad guys have the access to this technology, to this knowledge already, and they're practicing and they're, brainstorming. The good guys, only few are coordinating. The majority
Right.
haven't had is just a realization how bad things are, how massively the war has changed. Americans, they have no idea. They can tell you like they have idea, but they
Right.
don't. Most of the Europeans, they also don't. We see these, annual war games between NATO troops and Ukrainians, where Ukrainians
Right.
kind of finishing them in like no time.
Right.
Only like several countries, the Baltic, Poland, Czechia, all those closer to Russia, they're kind of absorbing this knowledge as fast as possible because they know. Anyway, so all of it
And
creates a
here's a great
completely
one.
different
Here's a great
situation.
one for you. Here's a great one for you to take because you'll speak about it better than I do. I often tell when I'm kind of browbeating the hell out of my American friends because they're crybabies about this stuff. Sorry. um, I mean, they're upset about the situation. They have no kings. I said, and I'll go back to like Euromaidan and before I go, okay, so imagine if November it got a little convenient and said, we'll meet again in December. Yanukovych will still be the king. That does not how it works. So I bring up what happened last July when it was when I was in Mykolaiv and Zelensky
Mhm.
decided to do some rollbacks on Nabu and Sapu. And a protest broke out. And I'm on the other side of the country finally. And 13 different great journalists, friends were all there, all Ukrainians. And everyone's upset. And I had this calmness that I learned from Mama, Sebudidopre, came up again. And I go, no, no, you don't understand. I go, no, no, actually, I've been studying about you guys. This is you working. This is it working. This is literally that the people went out immediately go, oh, really? You're going to what? Yeah, no, 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 no. So that night I was on the phone with a national security expert in America. And I said, let me tell you what won't happen tonight. Yeah. A violent crackdown. Good night. And I got off the phone. That's the point, is that Ukrainians have something to offer that the rest of the world just needs to slow down and pay attention to. It was that for 7 days, those particular voices that represent a lot of people who might not have showed up physically, or like I was on the other side of the country, um, that, and that was earned the hard way, you know?
Yep. Because at the end of the day, we're living through this massive global resurgence of imperialism. And if you need to learn just one thing about imperialism, that is just survives on constant expansion. That's no other way around. And if you allow it to be, not putting any costs on it, it will constantly expand towards, where it feels like it's going to be the cheapest to expand. And it's going to keep on happening with, Ukraine, Taiwan, smaller democracies,
Hmm.
whatnot. And, that kind of knowledge, right? People already know that it's universal. It can possibly to absorb. The fastest way is to be in Ukraine, build with Ukraine,
Yes.
working with Ukrainians, shoulder to shoulder. You can tell, and you're telling lots about it. So that's the only thing that is totally different now. I think, the universal value of that knowledge that could be is helpful, and unfortunately, lots of us will need it in the coming years.
Well, we put Soymol Razum. There's a lot to do, and we'll get it done. Thank you, brother. Let's come back like
Thank you.
as often as we can pull this off, and let's think about pods that we can put in the minds of these brilliant people who come in to learn and walk away. Let me say one more thing. One thing I really became in love with the Substack crowd. I watched them talk in other spaces with different types of experts,
Mhm.
a range of experts, and their questions show me like what they're eager for, which is the crowd I'd rather talk to because
Yeah,
they're going to walk away and do
absolutely.
more with it in the end. So, дякую, bro.
Дякую. Thank you so much once again for, just pulling me into this. It was really nice and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, let's do it again.
Dobrze
And thank you
wszyscy
so much, guys,
skoro.
for all the questions as well and reactions. That's just fantastic to read. Thank you.
Yeah, and in the future we can actually do like a Q and A with them. A lot of times I'll just say, "Hey, we got a little time. Let's put
I
about
think
15
that will
minutes
be
on the
the
clock.
most
Just
useful for people.
rapid fire stuff to us. So we'll do that in the next
Yep.
session. Okay, so Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
І пиздець Російської Федерації.